I'm also from Michigan, and I have been involved in the Grand Rapids project, but I was also a part of the Wood for Good Flint, Michigan project, which opened an urban wood marketplace using ash wood from our hazardous abatements. There I am. That's right when emerald ash borer was completely devastating Flint, and Flint had a lot of ash in their canopy. And so what I learned from these experiences is that collaboration is key. And when I moved here, I was fortunate to be reached out to by Sam Wolf over there, who said, hey, I know what's happened in Michigan about the Urban Wood Network, and I want to bring that to Oregon. And so together, we have worked with a variety of people to create a steering committee and start an Oregon chapter of the Urban Wood Network. This is actually our very first event. I obviously think highest end use is important, but also throughout my experience, I learned that both in urban and traditional forestry, there are a lot of low value timber that you can't necessarily make these beautiful slabs with. It has heart rot, it's infested, it can't be moved, it's within a quarantine, and there needed to be other solutions for that low value timber. I've been exploring biochar and air curtain incinerators, and I learned a lot because now working for DEQ, a regulator, I learned all about air permitting and emissions and emission factors and climate change. And so we got to working together on the emerald ash borer infestation and figuring out how we're going to control the spread of this and what is the most appropriate way to deal with this. And unlike what you heard in Michigan, a lot of the ash here in Oregon are in those natural riparian areas, and those natural riparian areas, they kind of connect some of our wild urban interfaces, and there is just, a lot of crossover with the need to, decide how we're going to control this and how we're going to find solutions that can be scaled up. And so we had a cross-agency project to test the air curtain incinerator. So I also want to make a shout out to Clean Water Services, who's here and who helped host this big project. You'll see a few slides where there's all this technical equipment over an ACI. And we actually hosted our test burn last week, and we are creating biochar and developing emission factors for these air curtain incinerators. Ultimately, the goal of this is we need a lot of solutions, and I absolutely am an advocate for those high value solutions, but at the same time, I know that there is a need for low value solutions as well, and I would be in trouble if I didn't talk about the crossover this has with our wildfire prevention and smoke management programs, which is a collaborative project between ODF and DEQ. Obviously, we are a state that has a wildfire problem, and we do a lot of prescribed burning, and we have some very smoke sensitive areas. So the exciting thing about the air curtain incinerators are that they have very low visible emissions. So you can actually stand right by where these incinerators are operating and you won't be impacted by the smoke. So these are a great smoke reduction unit or emissions reduction unit and technology. And so it's really just this kind of crossover where it can be a solution to some of our traditional forestry needs as well as our urban forestry needs. And the one thing I'll say about the Urban Wood Network is we're very new, but we're looking for members, and it's that way of bringing people together. So it brings together those that are the artists, the woodworkers, the millers, the sawyers, the arborists, the municipalities, the state. And so we're really actively trying to find members. You don't use the same grading scale for traditional lumber as you do for urban wood. And obviously Seth and Eric, they can contest to that. Some things that traditional sawyer would see and say, oh, that's not going to be good, you got to cut it this way, they may want. And typically what we find is that length is really important. Diameter can be very important, especially if your mill can handle it. But we are talking about potentially hosting training opportunities like that. I see Sam nodding her head. We're just getting started here in the Urban Wood Oregon chapter, and we're lucky to be able to provide some of those resources. So I think bucking and grading, but we're also talking about, biomass hubs and different ways in which we can utilize the wood. And there are a lot of resources that already exist on the Urban Wood website, like a toolkit on how to get started and that. But yeah, I'll pass it down. I just think that there's somebody else.
Yeah, I was going to address that also. It's exactly the reason why I'm out here, is to work with municipalities to help them build the infrastructure they need. Some of it is out there. For those of you who don't know about USRW, or Urban Salvage and Reclaim Woods, based out of California, they have just released in the last year the first set of standards that have never existed. And this is both for urban trees as well as deconstructed wood, so it's got both in there. For those, you may not touch that realm, but it's about a 75-page document. Just go to, if you just do a search for USRW Urban Wood, you'll find it. I do recommend you download it and review it and comment on it, because really in these first few years, one of the main things we're doing is want to make sure that it's being built for being as inclusive as possible for different size mills, for municipalities, for all the different players in there, that it works as best as possible for everybody. So there are now standards. It does give some grading criteria. It is definitely looser than traditionally forested, and you have to do that. With my company in particular, on the picture frame side, we spent a lot of time explaining, what's the character variation you're going to get. Other tools that are out there as well, tracking capacity now, kind of tying in with things like GeoPlanet, or Planet Geo, excuse me. There's several tracking programs out there. Ancestry, Trace is another one for tracking urban trees, and then also tracking it through manufacturing and processing. But it's about bringing everybody, everybody's out there. There's a lot of the resources out there. Getting everybody together and talking the same language and working together is the challenge.
You can't manage what you don't measure. And I think if your city does need a tree inventory or is planning to update your tree inventory, especially for ash, and if you're going to use those inventory results to figure out which trees you might potentially treat, which ones you might want to remove, you could add in a new variable, something like suitability, wood utilization suitability. It could just be a yes or no variable, and you could set what that definition is, right? Is it 8 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet? And you could speak with someone like Paul to maybe determine that.
I think it's important to start now when we're trying to get ahead of it and try to make the connections, set the standards with all of the stakeholders, from high-end users like mine to biochar and everything in between, because I think it's important that we don't get something kind of halfway set up that ends up being a hassle for both the people trying to manage it and then, the end users. And it is a challenge because, like you said, you have these huge log yard full of logs, but then what the heck do we do with it? And it's heavy and it degrades and you have to move it, and there's a lot to it. So I think the work that's being done here and some of the groups that are represented are really key in making it happen.
Policy is probably one of the biggest things we can do to help impact that, both on state, city level, and even federal level, but starting at city level, so you can pass that on to the next generation. It doesn't impact via like turnover of staffing.